Well, hello, everybody. It's good to be back. Been away for a while. We have a really good guest for you today. But before I introduce my guest, I want to ask you a question. What were you doing in 1983? Now, if you take a look at, I don't know, pop culture at the time, number one song for that year was Every Breath You Take by the Police. Motorola came out with the first cell phone in that year, about the size of pretty much a large gaming console in this day and age. What else is going on? Oh yeah, related. ARPANET introduced Internet Protocol or adopted Internet Protocol, actually effectively establishing the Internet, much to Al Gore's chagrin. And last but not least, I graduated high school that year. Go Blue Ridge Yellow Jackets. So that's some of the cool things that were going on. However, this world is a pretty nasty world a lot of times. And there was also a really, uh, oh, how can you put it? A nasty situation in Central America, specifically El Salvador. At that time, the Civil War had been brewing since 1979. It went on until 1992 when the peace accords at Chapultepec were established. But throughout those years, you had competition between the United States and from a macro level and the Soviet Union and Cuba basically coming together to have a surrogate war in El Salvador. What I wanted to do today, and my guest is going to talk about his time down there, I want to make sure that, as we as a nation understand and remember the sacrifices that our men and women have done throughout the decades. I consider this era kind of a lost era we've done a lot of amazing things out there to try and keep this country safe, but a lot of people went unrecognized. And so today, my special guest, he's back for number two. Couldn't get enough on number one. Retired Navy SEAL Rear Admiral Tom Richards, the Hulk. So this is Hulk 2. Welcome back, Tom. Thanks for coming on.
Good to be here, Wes.
All
Thank
right.
you.
All righty. So I did a really quick macro level of the things that were going on in El Salvador. One thing I didn't mention, during the whole 12 years, there was about 75,000 people were killed during that time frame.
Something like that.
And
Yes.
about 8,000 people were disappeared, right? Human rights violations, war crimes, what have you. So in an especially brutal time frame. So first question is, why and how and what did you do, or what was your position that got you to El Salvador?
Well, I need to back up just a little bit. I want to hit 2 points before I get in there. Sorry for the curveball.
Yeah.
The first one is one of the things people will frequently tell you as you join the military services. They say, "Don't volunteer for anything." I'm here to tell you that is the worst advice you can ever give anybody.
100%.
When opportunity knocks, as the saying goes, you answer the door and say, "Holy smokes, I wanna go there. I want to do that. I want to be part of that. Send me, coach.
Yeah.
So that's how I got to El Salvador. I'll give you a little bit more on that.
Yep.
But that's the first thing. Throughout my career, like you, I volunteered to go into naval special warfare, and one of the few mistakes you made in your career, of course, was volunteering to be my aide. But we'll forgive you.
I actually wouldn't volunteer for that.
I remember the story.
I was drafted in the second round, I think, or something. I don't know.
But anyhow, there are some really good opportunities out there, and if you just let them go by, you're missing out a lot on life. So if you see that opportunity, it sounds interesting, raise your hand and get on the road and go for it.
Yes, sir.
That got me into SEALs. That got me to El Salvador. That got me to a couple of other jobs in the course of my career, and every one of them been outstanding. So that's the first one. If you see that opportunity, answer the door. The second thing that I want to say, and I hope that it will come out in my comments as we talk about my time in El Salvador, and that is that I was truly impressed with the everybody in that embassy from the U.S. State Department. I have worked with a great number of interesting individuals, pretty smart folks. Bill Shepard, the first commander of the combined U.S. Soviet space station, former SEAL,
Yep.
brilliant man.
Yep.
I put Ambassador Pickering, and Bill in the same category, and I had a civilian job after retirement with a gentleman who ran a boat company, and Greg was just an absolutely brilliant and unique man, and I feel very comfortable putting those three individuals on the same level as my wife. So, and that was not that was not under duress. Jackie's just a brilliant lady
Absolutely.
and great counsel. Uh, so back to Ambassador Pickering. Uh, as I was warming up to go to El Salvador, I stopped by the State Department, and Ambassador Pickering was already assigned an ambassadorship, I believe, to Israel at the time. And he came through, and I just happened to be in one of the at one of the country desks. Uh, we met for 30 or 45 seconds. He said, "Thank you for volunteering to come down to El Salvador." And it was months later. I hadn't seen the ambassador in all this time, and you can just imagine the briefing to get him up to speed to go into El Salvador. Yeah, passed him in the corridor in the embassy. "Hey, Tom, how you doing?" Holy smokes! This guy has had his act together,
Right.
and he went on to be the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. Quite a fantastic individual. More on that later. So backing up, uh, in May of 1983, unfortunately, Al Schaffelberger, Lieutenant Commander Al Schaffelberger, Navy SEAL, was assassinated down there in El Salvador, and Jackie and I heard about this at a team party in May of '83, and so this is May of '83. Not a whole heck of a lot going on, and I don't know if I had ants in my shoes or whatever, but I felt like okay, there's something going on down there. People are shooting at each other, and maybe I can be of some assistance in that.
What were you doing at the time? What was your current position at that time?
At that point in time, I was commanding officer of Special Boat Unit 13.
Yeah.
I was lieutenant commander, and so with that position at Special Boat Unit 13, boat was a four-letter word that I could spell. I purchased my own first outboard motorboat at the age of about 14. So I was a water rat from any number of perspectives. So the job required SEAL experience, boat experience, Spanish language proficiency, and of course, they wanted a volunteer. You know, cerveza and baño was the limit of my Spanish at the time, but I had the other three, and apparently there was a short list of volunteers, about that long,
Right.
and so the colonel said, "Hey, this guy wants to come down here into this dicey environment. I'll be more than happy to have him." So I called the detailer. He was out at the time, so I spoke to his secretary, and as every SEAL officer from those generations understands, Margaret ran the show anyway.
Yes, she did.
So I spoke to
Ran my
Margaret.
life for 20 plus years.
Yep, mine for 30.
Yep.
So I let her know that I was interested and that I'd like to do it. Uh, and in that process, I made one of the greatest mistakes of my life. That is, I had not cleared that conversation with Margaret with Jackie. Uh, After I mentioned to Jackie that I had volunteered to go down to get shot, uh, she didn't speak to me for about 4 or 5 days.
What finally broke the ice?
I'm not sure. It was probably a bottle of champagne and a dozen roses. In any event, she knew, and I'll use this phraseology specifically. She knew what she married,
Yeah.
and she knew that if the opportunity was there, I was going for it. So I did. She's a very understanding lady, and like I said, one of the most brilliant individuals and wise individuals that I've had the opportunity to meet. So that's how I got to El Salvador. Uh,
And what was
Either
your position down there? What was it going to be going to?
I went down as the deputy mill group commander, as well as the senior naval representative. So that was, I didn't realize what a load that was until until I opened a rucksack. But uh, as the deputy mill group commander, we had several other staff members in the mill group, Army lieutenant colonels, majors. I was a freshly selected commander, Frock to '05 at the time,
Yeah.
and so I ended up in the position as the deputy there to the commander, even though I was far from the next senior individual in the office. Uh, then I was also the quote senior Navy representative, so I had to carefully monitor what was going on with the naval mobile training team that was down at the forward base of La Union. But I also had to, monitor everything else that was going on. But let me get back to that.
Sure.
In the in the course of my selection, they recognized the lack of Spanish training. So here I am as a commanding officer with all the responsibilities of inventory, awards, fitness reports, evaluations to be written as you change command. And now they're trying to set me up to go to a one-on-one Spanish language training program for about 3 weeks, and it was virtually impossible to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
How long did it give you to actually turn over your command and then go a trip down there?
it was between 3 and 4 weeks.
Oh man.
I that was probably one of the most difficult times of my life because of all those things that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Because I had been with these people uh, almost 2 years. It was only about 3 months. 3 months early, but I had programmed like 3 or 4 months to get all that stuff done, and so I had a month to do it. And I was damned if I was going to leave and not make sure people got the recognition
Right.
that they deserve for what they had done for me and for their people during that period of time. So I can't tell you how many nights that I worked till midnight or 1 a.m. on fitness reports, chiefs evals
Right.
and those things, because those are some very important documents in the
It's about their
lives
career. Yeah.
lives in their career.
Absolutely.
So that was pretty much of a challenge. The other thing that happened during that period of time, once I left Special Boat Unit 13, which by the way no longer exists,
Right.
but I left Special Boat Unit 13, and they sent me to a couple of courses en route. One was, I think it was Defense Intelligence, uh, something management course.
Yeah, the DISAM course. I couldn't find that acronym either.
They probably changed the name to protect the innocent.
Right.
And it basically taught you the raw elements of foreign military sales.
Right.
Where the money came from, how the contracts had to be worked. You didn't do contracts. You put all the parts in contact so that those things could happen and the money could be transferred to El Salvador so they could buy on the Navy's part the patrol boat. So it was a very interesting course. Rather dry,
Yeah.
but all of a sudden you're talking about tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, and I'm going, I can't count that high.
Yeah, there's like a million. Was it about 1 to 2 million a day was spent in that country that we were following down there? Is that about right, or is that?
That sounds a little bit high,
Yeah.
and as I recall try to recall the budget for the Salvador Navy. It was not very much, but the Salvador Navy was truly not a primary player in the Defense Institute of El Salvador. But there were several patrol boats, a couple of separate specific Navy installations that were trying to prevent the ingress of rebels and equipment. So they were a necessary force. Uh, so that they had that course, and then they had the uh, personal security course.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned last night, since Al Schafferberger was the most recent perceived series of mistakes, uh, the folks down in at that particular Army course jumped all over the laundry list of mistakes that Al had made, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on Al, but he found himself in some pretty trying circumstances. Uh, as some folks may recall, Al was assassinated at a local university as he was there waiting for his girlfriend at the time to come out of her office and meet him. And just with that statement, there's a whole lot of violations of what supposedly was the policy, supposedly a policy of non-fraternization with the locals. Not making excuses for Al. Al was a single man, and he was working out of the embassy in the capital of San Salvador, periodically going down to the other naval bases. But he primarily worked out of the embassy in San Salvador. With that policy of non-fraternization, uh, there was a previous mill group commander who came down there married, uh, and I'm not sure if he left married or he married the Salvadoran uh, radio or TV personality after he left. So uh, there was not a hard and fast rule being followed with regard to fraternization or not. In the course of Al's time down there, he had a bulletproof car, quote unquote. There was like an inch and a quarter. I want to say was Lexan in the windows, material in the doors and so on. But the air conditioning went out. Turn on the local TV. It's what, August 28th, and you're going to hear a story, unfortunately, of a child or a pet that was left in the car and died. With the windows rolled up. Well, that's basically what Al had. He had a sealed container without any air conditioning. You literally could not drive it. It became a four-wheel oven. Uh, so what should he have done? Not done his job, stayed locked in his office, try to move around the countryside. So he modified his choices and removed a window, which unfortunately gave the assassin the opportunity to walk up, and put one on the side of his head. So that was a whole lot of too bad. But
Did they ever find out exactly what got him on that list? I guess
I
of
think
all the people
what
in the embassy.
not too long prior to Al's assassination, I don't remember if it was Look magazine or Life magazine, did a multi-page spread on Al as being part of the U.S. military presence in El Salvador. There were pictures of Al in civilian attire moving through the city, and you know basically if anybody took a picture of me, I was gonna break their camera.
Right.
uh, but Al got his picture out there. He became part of the face of the U.S. presence in El Salvador. Unfortunately, he ended up putting a target on his back. Now, one must understand that Lieutenant Commander Schaffelberger or Commander Richards doesn't just go off to La Prensa, the daily paper, and say, "Hey, I'm here for an interview," or Look magazine. Look magazine comes down in the country, and they've got to get that cleared. And obviously, it was cleared through the embassy, through the mill group, and Al was apparently comfortable doing it. So it wasn't just Lieutenant Commander Al Schaffelberger, standing
Right.
up and doing something stupid.
Right.
I would say that people unknowingly made Al part of the face of the U.S. presence in El Salvador, and so that's what got him where he was. So let's back up. I'm sorry
No, all good. Yeah.
to part of your intro.
Yeah.
Uh, as you mentioned earlier, Wes, uh, during that period of time, the U.S. was dealing with uh, the export of a revolution on the part of Cuba as a Soviet proxy, and we were dealing with the Sandinistas, and you mentioned death squads and that type of thing
Right.
in the introduction, and as it was with the dueling nationalities. Uh, Russia, Cuba, and the United States. Everybody's blaming the other side for the death squads, for the disappeared. Uh, Depending upon which newspaper you read, the United States was training the Salvadoran military to build these death squads and conduct these assassinations and kidnapping and so on. And so it was really a mess. And just across the border from El Salvador, I mean, border being the key term here, U.S. presence is not going to cross that border. Salvadorans, may, but the Sandinistas had no question about coming into Salvador. So it was really a mess, and that was a situation that the U.S. military advisory group, that referred to as the Mill Group, found ourselves in. We were trying to train the Salvadoran military how to deal with these guerrilla tactics,
Yep.
and or I would call them terrorist tactics, because they did things like plant bombs, blow up bridges, totally seemingly totally random acts, but which were designed to disrupt the life of the Salvadoran people, and so this was call it a whole new face of warfare for a country like Salvador, Costa Rica. Pick your South Central American country. They were not dealing with these type of things, and we had to figure out how to train the Salvadoran military to deal with this.
Was there any because given the Soviet and Cuban influence there, were there any similarities from your experience in Vietnam that you noticed it with the any of these terrorist groups that came in there?
Well, I don't know about the specific terrorist groups, if you would call I would say the Sandinistas used terrorist tactics, but
Yeah.
they were a political insurgent group
Yeah.
in my mind, as
Right.
opposed to a bunch of random terrorists. Might be splitting hairs there,
Yeah.
but they did use terrorist tactics to advance their ideology. And so that's what the Salvadoran army had to do.
Right.
And the problem, the challenge to a conventional force dealing with terrorist tactics is the conventional force, or the call it the host nation. The host nation has to be on guard, on alert, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, in order to prevent something from happening. The terrorist organization observes at the times that they wish. They find they find a weakness, and they take that 5 or 10 minutes when somebody might have gone for a bathroom break, or there was a gap in the coverage here that they determined. So it gets real hard to defend against the terrorists, who only need 5 minutes of fame, but you need 724 of protection. It's an unfair weighting of the scales, clearly in favor of the terrorist organizations, and that's what the Salvadorans were facing. As we got down there, we were attempting to build the what do I want to say build the stability of the country. And in Salvador, the military was a key part of that. Not only the local police forces, but primarily the military, because they were dealing with these outside influences. and they were dealing with it to the best of their ability. Remember, they're a small country. You know, we're talking Cuba, Russia funding what's coming in.
Right.
You know, I mean, that funnel is pretty big. You know, going into the assets trying to disrupt El Salvador. So we're training them on checkpoints. We're training them on patrols. You know what to look for, and we had there was a uh, there were several senior uh, army advisors, primarily from special forces, who were working with the Salvadoran military. And every time you turned around, Colonel, you know, Schmuckatelli or Schwartz was being accused of teaching terrorist activity or torturing methods and so on to the Salvadorans, and all of that was horse hockey. The thing you have to remember about war is it's not spelled picnic. It's not spelled party. It's a three-letter word, war. And in war, people are shooting at each other and trying to kill the guy on the other side.
I think nothing's more brutal than a civil war. Also, that's just
Oh, yeah.
I'd say it's personal, right?
Well, not only is it personal, but take the Civil War.
Yeah, ours. Yeah,
The a person on one side of the street speaks, looks, dresses exactly like the person on the other side of the street.
right.
How do you differentiate who's who in the zoo, if you will, under circumstances like that? Yes, mistakes are going to happen. And that's a terrible thing to say. But I mean, when you look at a civil war, you've got family members fighting with each other, and it's so hard to control and to delineate the different sides. And those were the kind of circumstances that you dealt with in El Salvador. Let's go back to Al Schaffelberger for just a second.
Sure.
Al was your basic white American male. Okay, where is Al? Al's in El Salvador. Uh, uh, Most of those people are darker complected than Al. Al wasn't a very tall guy, so he didn't stand out from the height. He had a couple of extra burgers in there, but uh, Al stood out as a white American, as I mentioned in that article and those pictures, tagging him as part of the face. Part of the problem that Al faced was he was so easily recognizable. Many of the mobile training teams that we brought down into Salvador had yeah, Hispanic American members of the team, obviously for the language capability, but a lot of them are coming down and they have many of the traits of their Hispanic heritage. Dark hair, darker skin, and so they don't stand out, obviously, except for the U.S. Army or U.S. Navy uniform that they're wearing. But a lot of them were of Hispanic American descent, so
Sure.
they didn't stand out. Al absolutely stood out. So he had after that article appeared in the magazine, he had a target stenciled on his back.
So looking at so talk a little bit about the enemy group, right? So the main group was the FMLN. They also had I was looking at the list of other ones that are associated with it. In your opinion, what was, which one, or if were they all about the same, were they all, what was the most challenging group for you to deal with when you're down there?
Well, I have to say that from my series of my combination of positions, I didn't do very much of that myself. And again, the people that were dealing with the FMLN and the other groups were all the Salvadoran forces. We were authorized to have 55 U.S. advisors in country
Gotcha.
at any point in time. We didn't have an active mobile training team going out with the intent of trying to find the FMLN. It wasn't like SEAL platoons
Sure.
in Vietnam or anywhere else going out and target. We were advisors.
So you're in charge of all 55, right?
The mill group was in charge of all 55.
Okay,
We
and
had Army,
yeah,
Navy, and Air Force folks in there.
gotcha. So kind of describe for me, if you would, just your battle rhythm, right? So what did Tom Richards do, Commander Richards do, to make sure all 55 people were doing what they're supposed to be doing down there, and also being practicing the safe practices to make sure they get out of the country alive, right?
I obviously arrived down there because there was a job opening.
Right.
And uh, as a result of that job opening, I mentioned the training en route. Now, of course, I was a combat SEAL veteran at that point in time. Been shot at and missed, shot at and hit, and I knew a lot of things that you were supposed to do to prevent that. So one of my jobs as the XO there at the Mill Group, or deputy, was to brief incoming mobile training teams on what the force protection parameters were for them while they were in country. Now, recognize that I'm a Navy guy, right? And to
kind of kind
yeah,
of a Navy guy. Yeah.
kind of guy. Well, there were times in my life I considered that I wasn't in the Navy, that I happened to be in special operations for 30 years.
Yes, sir. Yep.
But so I'm viewed too often in that job as the Navy guy, and a lot of folks didn't know that I was a SEAL or whatever.
Yeah.
But Colonel Stringham has me briefing these folks on the security measures that we want them to take, whether the communications, movement, what they do in garrison, and they don't do in garrison, where they can go, etc. And so one one day, the guy that I worked for was an amazing individual, General Joe Stringham. General Stringham's He was Colonel Stringham at the time, but General Stringham's nickname was Smoking Joe Stringham.
Mm.
Uh, he was, I'll use the term peripatetic. You couldn't nail him down with a nail gun. He was always on the move. I was actually in country for like 7 or 8 days trying to get a feel for what the job was, and he'd pop in, hey Tom, how's it going? You have fun? And one day I just stood in his doorway, and as he had popped in and was getting ready to walk out, I said, Colonel, you and I need to have a little bit of a discussion about what my left and right margins are, because I don't want to step on your toes, and I want to make sure I'm not stepping on the toes of the boys that are doing their individual mobile training team management. It was a rise. Yeah, you're right. Okay, my house, 8 o'clock tonight. Be there. Hey, boom, and he was back out to the Estado Mayor. So one day he happened to be coming through the office, and I'm briefing a mobile training team about this, that, and the other thing. And there's a military term I know that you're fully aware of, and it's called Overwatch. And I'm starting to brief this Army 04 on his movement and Overwatch requirements. And Colonel Stringham just stopped and he looked at me. And he walked in, and after they came out, he said, "I'm sorry, I might have looked, at you surprised like I did, but I was kind of stunned to hear a Navy SEAL talking about movement and Overwatch and rear security and so on." He said, "I'm glad you're here." But so I had those responsibilities every time I sat down with a new mobile train, and they didn't take a head call until I gave them the security brief. And so they'd come in, and I'd give them the security brief, and I'd introduce myself, and I'd say, the reason I'm here is because there was a job opening. My predecessor was assassinated by the guerrillas. And when I said that, everybody stood up or sat up and started paying attention and said, "Okay, this is not just a 4 week mobile training team, and each cheeses are out of Jabip. This is serious." And just saying that to those guys really got their
Did
attention.
you change anything from a standard operating procedure perspective on what you briefed them prior to you getting there, or do you pretty much did the same thing, just making sure they're all locked down and actually following what was said?
I made sure that they understood what the deal was.
Yeah.
And if they screwed up, they wouldn't be able to grab their gear fast enough as they were thrown on the airplane to leave town.
Yeah.
Uh, so we had those 55 folks. One of the first things I would do is I would give them the security briefing,
Yeah.
and they would be working for one of the other individual, Air Force or Army officers there on the mill group staff.
Right.
But it was my responsibility to give Army, Navy, Air Force, etc. The security brief, which I did. Their actual mission briefs, were handled separately. But we had 55. We had the authorization for 55 advisors. Now let's go back again. You've got the Soviet Union, you've got Cuba, you've got the FMLN, you've got the Sandinistas. This was front page news
Right.
across the United States at the time. And of course, the question is, here we are, the United States again involved in what looked like the liberty or democracy of another small South Central American country. What are we doing here? The Congress, Congress and Senate were highly concerned about what it was we were doing, and so they were all over the president, sec state, sec def about what we were doing, and yeah, hearings all the time. So back to 55. My understanding is the way that came about was somebody was briefing Congress, and well, so how many trainers or advisors do you have down there? And whoever was being questioned didn't have a clue. Turns around to somebody behind him. He says, "I think it's 55," and bingo, 55 became okay. You can't have any more than 55.
Great way to develop strategy, right?
I'm telling. Well, 55 was
About right.
about right. Maybe 5 or 10 in a different direction at any given point in time. But it became one of those things. It was latched onto by the press.
Yeah.
And so we had reporters taking their shoes and socks off to count to 55 on a daily basis. Sorry, guys, but they were counting to 55 on a daily basis, and I was managing. Yeah, I was managing what the other guys were trying to do. And I gotta bring in a helicopter maintenance crew. I gotta bring in an artillery training group, and I would play referee with the colonel if the colonel bought off on it. Okay, guys, this is what we're doing, and the colonel was very supportive of me. We hit it off very well. So I'd work with the guys, and we time what particular group came in when, and we would in some cases we were at 55. I would have an outgoing mobile training team at the airfield to get on the frickin' airplane as the guys coming in for the next mobile training team were getting off. So we'd have 55. Uh, I was, I don't remember, I don't remember if it was the ambassador or if it was Colonel Stringham who said, if there are ever 56 people in country, you wouldn't even know where you arrived. uh, yes, sir, got that. So that was
Now, the 55 didn't count the country, your country team, right? Or
that's exactly
Right,
that's
right,
exactly it. This is a fun story.
yeah,
So 55 are the actual trainers. The mill group had uh, 5 or 6 officers, a couple of civilians, and a few senior enlisted troops. The defense attaché's office had a half a dozen folks in it. And then we had the Marine Security Detachment, and that was in the 20s. So let's say 25 Marines, uh, yeah, 8 or 9 mill group people, half a dozen. So you got about 35 other than the 55 who had administrative duties. We really didn't go down and train with the locals. We,
Right.
we might go down and observe a mobile training exercises, mobile training team exercises and activities to make sure that we were meeting the needs of the Salvadorans. But we weren't part of the trainers.
Right.
So every once in a while, something would happen. Maybe maybe the security readiness situation would change. Maybe there was a maybe there was a threat to a particular region. So every once in a while, we would bring in as many of the military people that we could. That would include the Marine Security Detachment, uh, and that would include the attache's office, and our staff, and as many of the mobile training team guys as we could get. Now, Salvador is smaller than the county of San Diego, so it's not that big. But because of the road closures and Sandinista FMLN activity, there were some places you couldn't get to and from unless you were flying. So, for example, the Navy mobile training team down at La Union, frequently couldn't make the trip unless there was back to San Salvador unless there was a convoy coming by for security. Long story short, we had uh, we had one of these meetings and we had well over 55 people there. Like I say,
Right.
you start with the 35 guys who were working there in the in capital San Salvador, and it's not too hard to get a 25 or 30, and boom, all of a sudden you're well over 55. And truly, there were parts of the press and or folks working for them who were counting what looked like American military people coming and going from the embassy. I mentioned that because we obviously exceeded 55 in the embassy on numerous occasions. On a regular basis, we had press briefings. Uh, Colonel Stringham uh, was rarely there for those press briefings. So guess who got to be standing up there with a target on his chest at the press briefings? Uh, and so I handled the majority of those press briefings. And the reason that Colonel Stringham wasn't there for those briefings was because he felt it was more important for his personal presence, the role and the example that he set to the Salvadoran military leadership with regard to human rights and all those other factors that were raging in the press. He felt that there was nothing better than his continued presence over at the Estado Mayor, their equivalent of our Joint Chiefs, if you will. But he felt that his continued presence at the Estado Mayor and them seeing him, understanding his reactions to what they were doing, and him being able to give immediate advice to his senior counterparts was the most important thing that he could do. And of course, I agreed with him.
Mm.
Yeah, because his his level of energy and his dedication and commitment were just exceptional. So I got stuck holding the press conferences, and getting stuck is probably being a little bit too flippant. It was a hell of an experience.
I was going to say you can't, in order to deal with the press, you have to deal with the press. And given your career, and as you get up higher in rank, and you meet common aspect work on at the end of the day, that's invaluable experience to be able to handle that kind of stuff, I think.
So I would handle the press conferences on a very regular basis, and there were a number of very difficult situations that occurred uh, on one occasion. Uh, a reporter for the San Diego Union uh, was killed as he was on scene in a firefight between the Salvadoran military and the FMLN. he's out there running around in the middle of a firefight. Now, we're retired SEALs. Uh, I used to be able to shoot the eyes out of a squirrel at about 100 yards. Uh, Even though Master Chief Carver might remember a time or two that I couldn't, but I got better, Master Chief. And so you don't always hit what you're shooting at because somebody on the other side of that highway or roadway or those trees is trying to shoot your bony butt. And that causes certain, physiological reactions. Parts of your anatomy pucker, and other parts might not act as you normally might expect them to. You might be breathing a little bit hard. You might be squeezing that trigger a little bit too fast, and that bullet might not go exactly where you want it to go. Okay, now that's you and I as seasoned, highly trained combatants. Members of the Salvadoran Armed Forces were nowhere near as well trained as we were. They didn't have the thousands of rounds put down range
Right.
that we were able to do. And so to put yourself at risk in the middle of a firefight, that reporter was a brave man. Would question his some of his thought processes. Don't take that personal, but to be out there unarmed, quite frankly, if you stop and think about those folks in the Salvadoran Armed Forces or the rebels being funded through Cuba, they could care less than a farthing for some American reporter, and yet so many of them put themselves out there at risk for what they firmly believed was the right thing to do, etc. I commend them for that. That part about putting themselves at that kind of risk with no protection of their own, I question strongly. But they did it on a regular basis. This reporter got killed, and it's hard to explain to a room full of his compatriots who are mourning the loss of a fellow reporter that he probably shouldn't have been there. And oh, by the way, these folks are not necessarily the best marksmen in the world. You got lead flying all over the place,
Mhm.
and he caught some of it, unfortunately. That was one of the worst press conferences I had. There was another one where we had a woman who was killed on one of the battlefields. And what I had to explain to the press corps was how the guerrillas worked. The guerrillas, while they were relatively well funded, were not as well funded as SEAL Team 1 or SEAL Team 7. And so when a fighter got shot, falls down, somebody from behind the ranks is tasked going up to check and see if Juan is alive or dead, and if he's no longer functional, grab that weapon and bring it back so somebody else can shoot it. And oh, by the way, get as many of the magazines and hand grenades as you can while you're up there. Up there is where Juan fell down and where people are still shooting. So when you bring up women and children in that role, they're right back there in that battlefield that I told you about, and they're trying to do what they either believe in or they're being forced to do, but they're trying to do what they've been told to do. And you know, again, war is not spelled picnic, and people are shooting to each other, and that person's actions to retrieve that gun are every bit as important to the role of the guerrillas as that individual shooting it. So there's, all too often, women and children were injured on the battle zone because of the roles that the guerrillas put them in.
Right. So how did you handle the press during those times, those two times especially? I mean, what was some of the, I mean, obviously you're not going to solve the problem, but how did you kind of at least mitigate the
Well,
issue?
yeah, I tried to explain to the press, for example, in the latter case, that this is how these guerrilla organizations operate. and quite frankly, any number of those members of the press actually understood that to a degree, except for the fact that people could actually get killed. They understood this to a degree because they had the opportunity they're able to walk on both sides of the street as the Salvadoran military is not, and or the folks like us in the mill group. We the only interaction we're going to have with those bad guys is if somebody's shooting at each other.
I guess maybe it's a good segue too. You mentioned Ambassador Pickering earlier. Obviously, you want to go into the country team and what you thought of them at this point, or what do you want to explore?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Ambassador Pickering was one of the smartest folks that I ever met.
Right.
I mentioned how he remembered my name after months, but let me give you another example. If Ambassador Pickering was in town,
Mm-hmm.
each mobile training team would give him a briefing on what they were here to do, what it was going to be accomplished, what their goals and objectives were, and how that fit in to the overall strategy. And oh, by the way, Ambassador Pickering was the overall strategy. Uh, so each mobile training team would provide the brief. Break. Before they would go up and give the ambassador the brief, they give the deputy mill group commander the brief. And I would, because I knew the ambassador, I knew how sharp he was, I knew the type of questions that he would ask. I would try to prep these mobile training team OICs, officers in charge, for success, so that they would be prepared for the kind of questions that the ambassador might ask. Sorry, Ambassador Pickering, but the type of questions that he might ask, and what he was looking for, what he was hoping to make sure they understood about their role in country. So Major Schmuckatelli, comes in one day, and we go through this briefing, and we were using butcher paper, flip charts.
This is before PowerPoint.
This is before all that stuff. What is this? Is this a fishing weight? But anyway, I explained to this major, okay, we go through the brief. And I said, okay, the ambassador might ask you something about this or that. I said, but we're here, and you put together a good brief. It's structured the way that he expects to see the brief. But you're going to be here. You've got 10 charts. You're going to be on chart number 5, and he's going to start talking to you about your summary slide, and he's going to be quoting exactly what you've got written on that chart number 10, your summary slide. You need to be prepared to understand that this man is going to be that far ahead of you. And I got it. We're good. Major comes down after it. He says, "Geez, Commander, I'm glad you told me about how prescient Admiral or Ambassador Pickering was, because just like you said, I was on like my 5th or my 6th flip chart. He already knew what I was going to be doing, and he was on chart number 10, and if you hadn't have told me that, I'd have been sitting there with a real dumbass expression on my face." And so, I mean, that's how things work. And and heck, that major said, "Thank you, Commander." Yes. Hey, life is good.
Right.
But a little bit more about Ambassador Pickering. As I said, El Salvador was front page news at the time. And Ambassador Pickering spent I'll say an inordinate amount of time. No, that's not right. Ambassador Pickering spent a surprising amount of time going back and forth, because every congressional committee
Right.
that wanted to have a question wanted to get it right from the man's mouth. What was going on? Who was doing what, etc. And on just about every trip back and forth to the States, the ambassador would more than likely see the Secretary of State, more than likely see and discuss with the Secretary of Defense, and on an amazing number of his trips, he'd confer directly with the president, maybe with those other 2 distinguished individuals in the room. because this, again, we're just talking about the press. It was all over the press. This is something that the administration did not want a black eye on.
Right.
And, believe me, Colonel String and I understood that completely. So Ambassador Pickering would, as I said, go back and forth to the States, and there was something called the country team. And the country team in an embassy is kind of like in the military. You have your operations officer, you got your admin officer, you got your finance guy. Well, they had their immigration guy, they had their visas, they had people who dealt with the NGOs, the non-government organizations, and they had their public affairs, and so. The ambassador would come back from the States and he would sit down and he would open a meeting with, when I was talking to the president, he said, now, this is Mrs. Richards' little boy Tommy here. And I'm sitting there across the table from Ambassador Pickering, who's about to recount the high points of a conversation with the President of the United States. Are you kidding me?
Right.
I was like, holy smokes, what have I done? But to hear it, the president is pleased with the progress we're making in the aid of this, or the improvement of this sector of the economy, or he's concerned that there's too much visibility on this in the military or whatever. And I'm going to myself, I hope you're remembering every word he says, because the colonel's going to want to hear it. But it was absolutely amazing to be that close to the decision making process of our country, which goes back to opportunity knocks, answer the door. I mean, look at that, look at that opportunity. So I really enjoyed that. And as we were talking just a moment ago about the press conferences, I actually enjoyed that because we were seeing our democratic processes in action.
Right.
Not only from what the ambassador would bring back from the president, but from those, if you will, opposition voices, trying to say A, B, or C. I clearly looked at things like a firefight as a place you really didn't want to be, and yet these members of the press are standing up and walking through there with these bright vests on that says press, and I couldn't quite see the bullseye on it, but there they are doing that. Completely different perspectives on how you look at a situation.
And to your point, it's like nothing makes you better than having to answer hard questions. And you need a true opposition, for lack of a better term, to ask those hard questions. And that puts you in a much better spot, because if you can answer those questions, then yeah, that takes care of itself, right?
It absolutely does, and it makes you pause and think about what it is you're doing. Do you really strongly believe in that? And to this day, as you've heard me say, I can't believe that these individuals will put themselves at risk like that, just because of the marksmanship or lack thereof on the part of of all parties concerned.
Right. Thinking about the country team, and I know in my own experience, there's always between the mill group and then the embassy. There's always that tension, right? You have, and one of my friends, he called it meat eaters versus leaf eaters kind of thing. So how did you, because you talked about it last night, about some of the challenges you had at first, and then what did you do to basically make yourself part of that team so they all recognize you as part of the team?
I have to say that was a real fun experience. It really was. And so Tom Richards, 5'11", 220 pounds, bench pressing 375 pounds, walks into a room, and what everybody says, oh, this guy must work out. Yeah, he does. And he works out around your brain, and he's gonna screw with your brain, and you're not even gonna realize it, because you're gonna ask him how much he can bench press, and he just stole your $200 million. So I quite frankly frequently got painted as the athlete in the room. So we, uh, we I got to El Salvador and I really sensed a significant uh, division, or at least a lack of cohesion between what was going on with the mill group, the mobile training teams, and the embassy. Let me break just a second here and talk about uh, the Secretary, the State Department, and the Department of Defense. The State Department is an arm of diplomacy of the administration of the president. The Secretary of State is selected by the president, as is the Secretary of Defense. But they're selected for a couple of very significantly different roles and missions. The Secretary of State is our ambassador to pick your country in the world. He has all kinds of interaction with the country with regard to economics, trade policy, taxes, tariffs, immigration, cultural exchanges, those kinds of things. They are building a particular type of relationship. When things go to hell in a handbasket, you call the Secretary of Defense and you ask him, do we have a quick reaction force to go in and rescue the people from the embassy of you know wherever, because things have gone to hell in a handbasket. You go from culture, economics, policy to action in so many circumstances. We are we within the the military in certain aspects are the antithesis of State Department activity.
Right.
So you've got a military guy walking into a room full of Ivy League college graduates who have been protesting the flavor of milk since they were kids. Uh, but you've got a certain antithesis there, uh, but not really. The Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense are there to support the goals and missions of the administration of the president, but more importantly, to represent the American people and the values that the American people have. Every time you or I interacted with a counterpart, they took something away from, oh, that Richards guy said or did this. Wes said or did this. This is how they approach that. So while we might not exactly look like ambassadors, every interaction that we have with our fellow military counterparts in pick a country is a form of ambassadorship, is a form of relationship, is a form of us showing them how the American military culture works. Yeah, on a lot of those mobile training teams, we're talking them shoot better. We're teaching them how to make sure that mortar falls where they want it to destroy whatever it is they're trying to destroy. But we're teaching them about how our military works. So we are, in many regards, the antithesis of the State Department, because I feel that oftentimes we're called in when the diplomacy has not worked.
Right.
That has got to be aggravating, disturbing to the State Department folks.
Right.
Wait a minute, give us another week, give us another 10 days. You may recall in Haiti, former President Carter and several other high-ranking members of the administration were in Haiti, and they were trying to work a deal with the three generals who had taken over Haiti, and they were getting close. We're getting close. Jimmy, Delta is in the air. You guys have got to get to the airplane and get out of there now. Mr. President, please, you got to stop. And so, on the one hand, you want to negotiate for that peaceful, resolution. On the other hand, the generals had pushed the United States to the point where, okay, boys, you know, time to time to saddle up, and that's what happened, and that was one of the clearest examples I have ever seen where you know, state and diplomacy versus military and action, really ground up right against each other.
Yep.
And my recollection is they actually had to delay some of the aircraft and boarding and unloading the aircraft because President Carter and his team, continued to try to press, but you have that antithetical relationship there.
Sure. Yeah. So I know, and the challenges between your group and Ambassador Pickering's team. They were there when you first got there. So if you can describe those challenges right quick, and then see how did you overcome those challenges?
Well, as I've said earlier, that State Department team that was there in El Salvador is a group of people I continue to admire greatly to this day, and most of them were probably all were volunteers and so on, but they, as our cultural, economic, policy representatives of the United States, uh, they uh, they select a bearing or comportment to reflect the dignity of their position. And I'm not BSing here at all. That's exactly what they do. You walk in and you talk to assistant, consular officer Schwartz, and you know, she's sitting in there in a three-piece suit and jacket and blouse, skirt, whatever, and looking every bit as professional as you would expect uh, him or her to look. When I got to the embassy, uh, virtually every rank in the building was, other than the attaches, they were more formally dressed, but all the milk group people were wearing blue jeans, t-shirts. A couple of guys might have bothered to put on a polo shirt like yours, but that was it. So if you walked in uh, the embassy building that we were in at the time had if you will, four outer walls, uh, balconies overlooking an interior atrium, uh, and so you could walk out and look around the walls up or look around the different floors up or down, and you never saw a guy in blue jeans and a t-shirt talking to that guy in a three-piece suit. You didn't see it. uh, we were uh, we were very much ignored. And I just kind of looked around, and first thing I said to myself, this really isn't very professional to begin with. Uh, and I said, okay, we're going to lose the blue jeans and find yourself a collared shirt. Uh, and then that went to a button shirt and a tie. I said, I want you to bring in a sport jacket to have it to go to meetings in case you have to do that. But that I did that over months, uh, and all of a sudden, 6 or 8 weeks later, you walk around the embassy and there's Major Smith talking to the cultural attaché for whatever, and it made a huge difference. Now, there's that old expression that clothes don't make the man, but they sure opened a few doors, and things changed significantly. Interestingly enough, Colonel Stringham noticed it as I was doing it, and as I said, it's you just have to pay attention, and you looked at who your counterparts were. You know, like I say, these folks they're all college graduates, as were the officers in the mill group. They've all been foreign service officers, and it's not easy to pass the exams and get into the foreign service system. So these were all some pretty high achievers, and I wanted them to recognize us for the commitment and sacrifice that our guys had as well. And so I think that I think that all went over pretty well. You know, we're down there in El Salvador, and we couldn't go to the Macy's or wherever to get a suit or a shirt. But I tell you what, you could walk around that mill group and you could find a magazine that's full of ads for
Yeah.
military this,
Took it out
military
down,
that,
yeah.
and
Yep.
so who was it? At that point in time, I ended up sending off, and I got a catalog from Land's End, if you will. I can still remember that, and I can't tell you how many items of clothing, etc., that I ordered from Land's End.
Yeah, that's basic teamwork though, right? I mean, you have it's their country. I should say it's the embassy is that's their turf. That's their turf.
Absolutely.
And if you're not dressed appropriately, what else are you not doing right?
Yeah,
And so you have to. There's rules of engagement, spoken and unspoken, that you
yeah.
got to follow in order to be part of a team.
And that was exactly it. And so let's be part of this team, and let's make sure that they understand our commitment to do that. Because all those guys in the mill group were were doing their job. Finding the mobile training teams, and so we just started blending in a little bit better.
Yeah, awesome. So you want speaking about uniforms, then you want to get into gear and your tactics and how you kept safe driving around there. Is that something you want to dive into?
Sure.
Okay.
As the as a deputy mill group commander, I was fortunate to get a armored Suburban
The AC.
with AC and a 454 cubic inch power mill.
Nice.
It needed it the whole. I mean, because
Yeah.
you got 1,000 pounds of extra weight in that damn thing.
Right.
So I was also provided with a guard going down there.
Local guy or
A local army individual.
how'd they vet those guys? I'm just curious.
That I do not know. I'm embarrassed to say.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, but I was quote assured they were. What that process was, I have no idea. I lived with two Army helicopter pilots. Uh, one was a maintenance pilot. One was a training pilot. Uh, and the one of them went on to one of the special helicopter units we have,
Gotcha.
and so he was he was he's a daredevil son of a bitch.
Where you guys look? Is it on the compound or is it out in town? Where you living?
Oh, we were living in a house out in town. So the three of us that were there on 1 year orders, and at that time, what the military did was to provide us single BAQ. They knew that we were leaving families in the States, so we had those expenses. So we kept that, but we also got instead of per diem, we got single BAQ to live on.
Oh wow.
Per diem would have been fun,
Right.
but anyway, we got single BAQ, and so the three of us pooled our assets. We found a house that had completely walled in and completely enclosed, a pretty sturdy gate, garage where the guards, each of us had an assigned guard / driver, so we were able to have the three guards rotate through the night for a level of security, and they stayed there in the living quarters above the garage. Now, part of that living quarters above the garage was my weight room, but they lived in the garage. So we had those three guys. To start with, I allowed my guard to be my driver. Once I learned my way around town, uh, not being a control freak, but being a safety and security guy, I knew how I would react if something happened. So once I knew my way around town, I drove. And we would uh, leave the house, and we'd get in the car, and I carried an Uzi in the car. I left the M16 at the house, but carried an Uzi in the car, Browning high power, and a Walther PPK, and,
That was your ankle holster,
PPKS, and so whether the guard ever saw, he saw the, no, did I say Walther? I meant Browning.
right?
He probably saw the Browning, but every day I'd get in there, slap a magazine into that into that Uzi, and make sure that it was cocked and locked and ready to go. The other thing that I would do is I would conduct a radio check. Now, I was doing this not only for my own benefit, but I was doing that to send a message to that guard. If he, whatever conversations he had, yeah, that Richards guy, I mean, he's just paranoid about this security stuff, Every time you get in the car, locks and doors, I'm afraid he's going to shoot me one of these days, you know. Uh, always makes a radio check. Uh, and so, if anybody ever asked him about my vulnerability, was there a hot gun in my reach? The answer is yes, always.
Always, yeah.
In my bedroom, I had a little nightstand on either side of the bed, and I had two backpacks, pretty close to the same. One for the Uzi, one for the M16, because I didn't want to have to roll out of the bed on that side and come around the bed to get the gun if I needed it. That's how tenuous the situation was on any number of occasions, which I did not share with Jackie until she got down there. Uh, but that's that's how conscious I was of my own personal protection. Uh, so he knew what I was doing when I was doing it, and I think that I definitely think that paid benefits. No matter who talked to him about what, they knew what Richards was doing from a security.
How'd you guys minimize the fact that you're in a stationary house, can't move the house? And do you ever change houses, or did you stay?
No, we did not.
Yeah.
But before I would leave, I would have a guard do a check outside the gate before we left, just to see if there was anything unusual.
Right.
And that's about what we could do.
Yeah. What was your you mentioned the idea, biggest pucker factors. Operating in and out of that house. I'm assuming that was one of those pucker factors. Is there a story you want to tell about that?
Well,
Because you said we kiss your ass goodbye. Was what you a moment that you had?
uh, we had a couple of those.
Yeah.
So we worked really hard down there.
Mhm.
I basically worked 7 days a week, six and a half. Took off Saturday morning to play softball, uh, but that became a problem. Some members of an agency to remain nameless, came down to the colonel's office, and he said, Joe, how about telling Tom to uh, make sure they cancel the softball game this weekend, or they move it somewhere else. And we ended up having to move it to a bunch of different places. But what it was the military, the Marine Security Detachment would play the embassy. We'd get together, and it was a lot of fun. It was a great icebreaker between the embassy folks and the military. We had guards posted at points around the softball fields. But one time they called and said, Joe, tell Tom to make sure they either cancel the game or they move it. Uh, I mentioned the weights a couple of times. Uh, you're on those unaccompanied tours, I was allowed to ship like 1,000 pounds of personal goods to El Salvador. Now, of course, your military stuff doesn't count. So, so
Your whole weight room came out, didn't
I shipped 500 pounds of weights, a bench, a couple of squat racks, and so that crap arrives, and they have to put it in storage at the embassy until I get there, and so they're like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
What the hell? Because everything else I needed was uniforms or guns, and and a couple of sets of civvies. But anyway, that was got off a little bit. That got off track there a little bit. So we had a couple of a couple of real ah shit moments, and one of them uh, one of them were I'm with the colonel and the sergeant major, and we had just been to a meeting. Now the colonel had this great souped up suburban and fully armored vehicle, and we're coming back from whatever meeting we had been at. Sergeant Major's driving. He probably taught defensive driving, but Sergeant Major is driving, and I believe it was the colonel who noticed in the side view mirror that you know looks like we got company, and they did one of those uh, forward and back. One car comes up and passes you, slams on the brakes,
Right.
turns sideways.
Right.
The car behind you turns sideways. Well, as the saying goes, if you don't like the way I drive, stay off the sidewalk. Because Sergeant Major had us up on that sidewalk, around that trees, and around that blocking vehicle in front of us
Oof.
in the blink of an eye. But I mean, they got Schaffelberger, and they were after somebody else. And
Yeah.
now they were either they either had a tail on the colonel or me, and or the sergeant major. But they were looking to get another feather in their cap. They blew it. They blew it on that night, and I credit the sergeant major driving for getting us out of there. That was that was an interesting one. There was another situation where, as we're working towards helping the country establish the security protocols for the upcoming election, and that was a joint police and military evolution for the country of El Salvador. And this one particular night, we had a meeting with Ambassador Pickering. The colonel, myself, I don't remember if the attaché was with us, and Ambassador Pickering, and so we sit down with the ambassador, and as I said, Colonel Stringham provided the example of leadership with his presence at the Estado Mayor on a regular basis. So he knew what was going on at the Estado Mayor, and how the preparations were going, whether it was the electoral sites or whatever. And there was a particular situation going on where things were, I will use the term, fraying. And the ambassador, Colonel Stringham gives his update, and I'm pretty sure the attaché was there, and they discuss it. And Ambassador Pickering turns to Colonel Stringham, and he says, "Write this up and send it off to the president." What? Sure, okay. He said, "Go,
I'm gonna screw it up, by the way.
And so, Ambassador, the colonel and I leave the office, and he says, "Okay, Tom, put together a draft."
Yep.
And so I put together a draft, and the colonel didn't change 5 or 10 words. We put it together. He says, "This pretty much summarizes what we discussed. How do you address a message to the White House and the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense?" I said to him, I said, "Colonel, I haven't got an effing clue, but I'm willing to I'm willing to bet the guys with the horn rimmed glasses and communications can find that in their books pretty easy. And so there we go out and we Mrs. Richards' little boy Tommy again is providing a sit rep. Yeah, whether I'm sure it went to action officers and pick your location, and don't know what was read by who, but here we are sending off a message to the White House, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense offices uh, about uh, the current situation in El Salvador.
Right.
Holy, you know, opportunity knocks, answer the door.
Great. So thinking, yeah, here's kind of an off the wall question for you. The challenges that you've seen down there, and the challenge, given the fact that the Soviet Union and the United States that time had, that was really the Cold War was pretty boiling at that time, right?
Absolutely.
And so, uh, if you don't, people ask me, given my current or my experience in Afghanistan and the Middle East, people ask me, well, why are we there? I said, well, in order to prevent things, you got to be on the playing field, right? And to a certain extent, how we do that is always a very delicate balance to do it effectively. Anything from your experience down there, if you were president for the day, would there be something you might want to change or different strategy, or did we pretty much had what we had, and we just kind of had to grind through it?
It was a situation that we had to grind through.
Yeah.
To your point about the Cold War raging at that point in time, as it was, Soviets, through some of their proxies, were doing the best that they could to make life uncomfortable for the United States.
Yeah.
And we're better to do it throughout South and Central America, just south of our borders.
Right.
Obviously, the Soviet Union is a long ways away, so they used those proxies to try to get to us. Uh, and I will say that the president, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of State were not heavy-handed in this in this situation. They were going about. I was impressed every time the ambassador came down, and he when he talked about some of the factors that were considered about what they wanted us to do and how they wanted us use the military term prep the battlefield for the relationships between the United States and El Salvador. It all made sense. There was no, I didn't see any knee-jerk reaction.
Sure.
Now, I'm sure there was a lot of code word stuff flying around I never saw, and obviously didn't need to. But I think that there was a level, steady approach to things, and even though I said as we were working our way towards the elections, and we had a couple of pretty bad nights. By the way, the night that we sent that message I talked to a while ago, I went back to the house in the compound, and I double checked the material I had in my go bags, just in case things went to hell in a handbasket. So I think that the administration and the State Department did an excellent job down there, and I'll go so far as to quantify that, because while we were there, we enabled the country of El Salvador to have their first free democratic elections, and my recollection is that Mr. Duarte won that election. Dare I say, I believe he was a Notre Dame graduate. Villanova used to beat them regularly in basketball. They beat us a fair number of times, but we actually enabled that country to hold their first ever democratic elections. To be able to sit here today and say that, I had a small part in what was done. The colonel, the mobile training teams, all the folks in the embassy and the mill group, etc. There was a lot of hard work put in there, and it paid off. Unfortunately, today Salvador is torn by all the gangs, but that's that's another chapter in their history and has to be addressed
Yeah.
through different means. But I take I take a great deal of pride in the amount of work that everybody down there at the embassy at the embassy did. It was really impressive.
Yeah, so we had talked about the U.S. country team, you're the mill group. We hadn't really talked about the El Salvadorans, and so I know you had some thoughts on their CNO. I like to have some thoughts on him, but I'd also like to hear how your thoughts. You talked a bit earlier about young kids, not very experienced, fighting a really tough war. Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on how they came together while you were down there, and just on one effectiveness. Did they get the training? Was that effectively, you know, absorbed by them or not? I'd like to hear your thoughts on those kind of things.
Well, when we got when I got into country, the Salvadorans had a patrol boat that apparently hadn't been underway very much anytime lately. The engine room was a laundry, and the Salvadoran Navy was not very well paid or well utilized, which is uh, sad to say because you have to look at the size of the coastline that they have, and the southern end of El Salvador has that was it Jicalisco Bay, uh, and which was just a uh, highway for smuggling stuff into El Salvador. Uh, so, but in many of those countries, the Navy is an unfunded afterthought, and that's where it was. Uh, there was, interestingly enough, there was a one of the mobile training team, OICs was a guy named Tom that became, I'd say, a good friend of mine, and I had a lot of respect for him. Uh, he uh, uh, he got down there and he discovered that uh, one of the one of the individual officers seemed to be a little bit different than everybody else, and he finally got to start talking to the guy, and it turns out he was a Buds graduate.
Oh wow.
So they had a couple of well trained individuals, and as Tom indicated, this guy was clearly the cream of the crop, and obviously spoke good English, but Tom had a certain amount of Spanish as well, and but they could have they could have done more things had they had the opportunity to uh, opportunity for training, which required money that they just didn't have. Uh, I got down to Salvador. As I said, it was with Al's assassination. There were a lot of things we didn't have the time to do. Not the least of which was Spanish training, and apparently the CNO of the Salvadoran Navy at the time, held held that against me and probably against the United States for being so presumptuous of sending a non-speaker down there. Uh, by the way, by the time I left El Salvador, I was far from fluent, but I started to dream in Spanish. I
Wow,
mean,
that's a sign.
yeah,
People I've known, and once you start dreaming it, that means you understand it pretty well.
yeah. I was so my fluency increased by leaps and bounds, uh, but I had uh, I had any number of meetings with the Salvadoran CNO, and he personally decided to make it as difficult as he could. That is, requiring the translations. Uh, Scott, another one of the OICs, uh, did not think that the CNO spoke English. I said to him, Scott, the man's fluent. Uh, the man's fluent. But uh, his country, his rules. This is the way he wanted to do it. So that's fine. I wasn't going to let that interfere with me working as hard as I could to do things. Fast forward a few months, and we received X number of millions of dollars to purchase a new patrol craft for the Salvadoran Navy. And the Scott and the CNO were going to go up to New Orleans and pay a visit to the shipyard where the builder was and was going to be constructing the vessel. So I said to Scott, I said, Scott, remember, this guy speaks fluent English. And I say that for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is so you don't say something you shouldn't.
Right.
Oh, no. Okay. So Scott says they're in the air. They're not far from landing wherever. I don't know if they went into Miami or maybe they were able to fly directly into New Orleans, but they're in the air. So, turns to says in Queen's English, so come here. Can we put me on the rental agreement as an additional driver so I can get some practice? And Scott says you could have you could have knocked him over with a feather. But he came back and he admitted to me. He said, "You are absolutely right." But that CNO wanted to exert his authority, and the only reason it bothered me is because it made both of our jobs more difficult,
Yeah.
and it didn't have to be that way. But that CNO must have known that I understood everything that I just said to you, and that he wanted to do things his way. Well, the U.S. Navy used to have an annual gathering of CNOs from around the world, and the CNO from El Salvador went to one while I was there. And shortly after that meeting, I get a call from a Navy captain in the CNO's office, and he want to speak to Colonel Stringham. Now, Colonel Stringham and I really had a fantastic relationship. He trusted me, and he knew that I wouldn't do anything to violate that trust. So I said to this captain, I said, Captain, I don't know, I don't know what you need to talk to him about, but we share pretty much everything that goes on, and that no need to. Fine, got it. So name, number, and so Colonel Stringham calls the captain back. It turns out that the Salvadoran CNO had dropped a dime at me at this worldwide CNO meeting, and Stringham just went off on this.
They wanted you fired, right?
Yeah, they wanted me fired. Called back to the United States. Said I didn't speak English, and as I said, I speak Spanish.
Yeah.
See what I mean? Don't even speak English.
I'm barely English.
So my Spanish was getting better and better. So anyway, he has this conversation with this Navy captain, and he says that Richards ain't going anywhere. He's doing a fine job, and by the way, he pointed out the fact that the Salvadoran CNO is just making life difficult on Richards and his ability to do his job, just because of the Spanish language thing. That was highly disappointing. But that hey, his call. But again, Smoking Joe Stringham stood up for me. So
Did that ever impact you after that, or is it kind of just were you able to just pretty much get through it after that? Or did he ever try and do anything else, or did it really impact any business at all?
No, and again, with the mobile training team, OICs, did not have the benefit of the DISAM course that I had, nor did they have. I shared with them everything I could think of
Yeah.
course, but they didn't know the funding or what was coming when or until I found it and I could share it with them.
Sure.
So I would do that, but there were things that it just made sense to have me involved in that maybe we could have. I know we could have done differently, and for the benefit of the Salvadoran Navy, but he just didn't like the cut of my jib. So too bad, so sad.
What could you have done better? And what if he'd been more amenable? What could you actually have improved with for him?
Well, if he could have expressed where he wanted to go with the Navy, or we could have,
Yeah, strategic vision, right? Yeah.
a strategic vision, intercept operations, counter the smuggling that was going on, maybe create a little special operations group, within the Navy. But he and I couldn't go there.
So when you were was it mostly just riverine training you were doing at that time, or yeah,
Riverine
yeah,
training, patrol tactics.
there you go. Okay.
We had. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the role of the Marine there, uh, but we had a Marine member of the training group. We had communications and electronic technicians. We had uh, we had engine maintenance, training, and specifically for the type of engines that they had in their small craft. Now, in naval special warfare, the engine on the Mark III patrol boats that I had, 65-foot Mark III patrol boats that I had, was a 8V71 Ti, turbocharged Detroit diesel
Mhm.
8V71. I can't believe I can remember that crap. Can't remember my name, but anyway, an engine like that 8V71 is something like a ship service diesel generator, maybe. It's not a main propulsion engine on a U.S. Navy vessel. So when a fleet engineman used to come to a SEAL or a special boat unit, they were seeing stuff, whether it was engines, guns, and radios. But even though they might have been a fleet engineman, they might never have seen something like the 8V71 before in their lives. Same thing, going down there to El Salvador. We had to find technicians, Navy enginemen who had been who associated with small engines like the little diesels that these guys had in their craft, and that wasn't always easy to find. And now we need the guy to be Hispanic because he's gonna be working on it. Couldn't be like I was
Right.
because he's going to be working on a daily basis with his counterparts, and he had to communicate.
And communicates technical stuff too, which is even more difficult.
Highly technical. So those became challenges. But I've got to say, whether it was the Marines or the fleet, they probably got something that used to be called SCIATs, small craft and something technical, training school. Used to be down in Rodman. That's now been moved to
Stennis, right? In Mississippi.
Stennis.
Yeah.
And that was, dare I say, my fault. The U.S. Navy, big Navy, was looking with we had to close down everything going on
Right.
down in Rodman as we turned over the canal, Panama Canal. So a lot of places were looking for a home, and the big Navy doesn't do small boats and small engines.
Yeah.
And
On
so-
rivers, yeah, for sure.
right.
Yeah.
And so, but that Nav Skiats, as it was called,
Mhm.
was a huge door into South and Central American navies because they had small boats, patrol boats, river boats, and so on. And so they were deploying around South and Central America on a regular basis, doing all kinds of training with their counterparts. So as I was a commander of Warcom later on, and I saw this happening, I said, "Hey, we'll take Nav Skiats." And it was another entire field of training that we could get into because you know we now had our own naval special warfare combatant crew members.
Right. So you have
Bingo.
access, right?
We
Access to
gave
presence.
we gave those SWICs, as you just said, access and presence through nav skiats. Now, those even though those SWICs, among other things, had to be outstanding enginemen, communicators, shooters, and so that whole laundry list of skills that they had complemented nav skiats had, and again it was a another expanded opportunity for SWIC assignments as well.
Right. Awesome. So, last thing I got here, just to, I got to touch on it because one, I'm a firearms nut, and I know a lot of the audience is too. So, you mentioned you had your Uzi, you had your M16, you had a Browning high power, and a Walther. What made you, besides being issued, as a standard issue weapon as an M16, what made you have that combo? And what would you change anything differently? Looking forward today, what we have today, or was that particular mix a really good mix for you?
Uh, it was a really good mix for me. Uh, let's go back. I I have had a Browning high power since 1970.
Hmm.
So
You still got it?
I've got a different Browning high power. But
We got to talk about, you got to get the new one, right?
oh yeah, I may. We'll see what Jackie says.
Right.
But I've still got I've got a second Browning high power, and Browning high power. Mr. Browning was a hell of a weapons designer. It's been around forever, and as you just said. Is it FN has come back and is making the new quote high power?
Correct.
Very, very much the same gun, and they did it because there was such a continuing design for such a reliable gun.
Right.
That was my high power. It was a reliable gun. I wasn't concerned about it. It's also not that big.
Mm-hmm.
Round as I am, there's plenty of places to hide that. So I had the Browning high power, dependable weapon. I had a Walther PPKS, and that shoots the 380.
Mhm.
And
Is that a personal weapon as well, or is that?
yes,
Okay.
that was a personal weapon. And I down there in El Salvador, people expected you to be carrying. And so we go to various places, and they'd have lockers for you to, put the gun in the gun in the locker, and I'd put the Browning in the locker and leave the Walther on my ankle. I'm surprised that they weren't asking more questions. Be that as it may, the Uzi was a weapon that I was familiar with, and the I mentioned Land's End earlier.
Right.
Land's End used to make this handy dandy, heavy duty canvas little tote bag.
Yeah.
And I had one of those Land End tote bags, and in it was my Uzi and several spare magazines. I mean, you're looking at this Land's End. Okay, what's he got in there? His workout gear? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'll work out with you on this. And the Uzi. The Uzi fit in there inconspicuously, rattled a little bit with the magazines, but should have wrapped them a little bit better. But the Uzi in there was a good fit. Today, and I'm not sure what weapons the guys have in the inventory today, but I might go for an MP3 instead, just because I'm a little bit more familiar with with the workings. But the Uzi was just a little bit touchy.
Yeah.
And
Well, it fired from an open bolt too, so yeah, you had to really watch what you were doing.
exactly.
Yeah.
So so that was, but the size was what I went with on the Uzi, and for the relative amount of concealment. Because I mean, I could be if I walk in the door, I've got a Browning, a couple of spares. I've got my 380, and I've got my little Land's End bag with whatever Commander Richards has in that bag.
I'm gonna look at you differently from now on. I see a Land's End bag walking around when you walking around. That's awesome.
But Land's End might take offense, but I appreciated nice, heavy duty, durable construction, and so that's why I went for the Land's End bag.
Excellent.
But and for years after that, I carried Land's End, canvas, bags. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so I had those, and I mentioned earlier I had a go bag on either side of my rack
Right.
because I didn't want to have to get shot out of the rack on one side and have to make it to the other side to get a gun.
Was it issue backpack or just some backpack you got down there?
Uh, Backpacks.
Yeah.
At that point in time, we didn't have issue backpacks
Right.
in these
Yeah.
teams.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of black backpacks and stuffed them with food, money, magazines,
Yeah.
a little bit of water because there was water everywhere down there. And so I had that go bag on either side. The other side was a short barreled. Was it a car?
Yeah. It was a car. Back in the
Yeah.
days. Yeah.
So I had the car on the other side of the rack
Yeah.
because, like I said, if things go to hell in a handbasket, seconds can make a difference between life and death. And so I wanted a gun handy.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
And again, that one got out.
All right, Tom. So as we're wrapping up here, you know how the show. I always like to talk about lesson learned. So if you can give us some of your biggest lessons learned you had from your year in El Salvador, 1983 to 84, that'd be great for the audience.
Well, I'm going to have to repeat myself a little bit here, Wes.
Okay.
As I said, when opportunity knocks, answer the door. What I what I had the opportunity to learn in that year in El Salvador from folks like Colonel Stringham, any number of the other members on that mill group staff, so many of the State Department, Foreign Service officers. It was just an absolutely incredible experience. Colonel Stringham was replaced by another Army Colonel Steele, and Colonel Steele, shortly after he got there, asked me if I would extend for X number of months while he got his feet on the ground and so on. And I had already, if you will, taken a step outside the naval special warfare job progression, sequence, if you will, by going to El Salvador. Uh, it did not hurt me. I do not believe. Of course, it didn't hurt me, but I think that had I stayed another year, I would have got out of sequence for. I had the ops job
Right.
at Group One, and I went from Group One ops to CO of SEAL Team One. That could have all gotten thrown out of sequence. So I said to the colonel, I said, Colonel, I appreciate uh, your your request, and I'm personally flattered that you would want me to extend. As he said, yeah, everybody in the embassy says you're just doing a great job. And again, I said, no, thank you, but I really didn't want to spend too much time there. But that said, the opportunity to take a job like that during that time in our nation's history, when what was going on in South and Central America, the Cold War, you know, Cuban proxies doing this, that, and the other thing to attempt to undermine our relationships with other countries throughout South and Central America. It was just an incredible learning experience. My opportunities to deal with the press was and sometimes difficult, but it was dealing with a part of the culture and fabric of who we are as Americans, uh, as well as dealing with some of the folks in the embassy who were not particularly happy to have military people around as the embassy is trying to do the cultural, economic, agricultural, industrial, things that they are in the country. And unfortunately, and I'll say unfortunately in any number of regards, when you have to turn to the default of military action, it's a shame because it says so many other activities have not borne fruit. So I can understand, any number of those perspectives by foreign service officers. So I really had a fantastic opportunity to learn a lot as I went on, and I was, fortunate enough to be selected to flag. I found myself in any number of circumstances dealing with the press. Yes, I had had 2 or 3 days of quote press training or media relations training, if you will. What to expect, how to deal with them, respect
Sure.
the press, and so on. But how to respond, and how to avoid certain pitfalls. I hadn't had that when I got to Salvador in the 80s. But my experience in Salvador helped me to learn even more from the media relations training that the Navy provided me later on. And so that exposure to the State Department was amazing. The exposure to media relations and the press, and the the interesting opportunity. I was far more aware of what the bad guys were doing, if you will, in Salvador than I was in Vietnam. In Vietnam, I was going on missions day in and day out. In El Salvador, I was looking at, okay, the guerrillas just bombed this bridge. What are they trying to prevent from happening? What are they going to be doing? What are they going to be next? What's their goal in this bridge? How does it divide? How does it divide the country? What should as I'm having conversations with my other military advisory group folks or the trainers, what do I have to tell them to be aware of from a situational awareness perspective? Just so much expansion uh, of my of my abilities across a variety of specialties. It was just a fantastic opportunity.
All right. Anything else? Lesson learned wise?
Uh, that's probably pretty close to it, Wes.
Okay. It's we've said it before, but this is one of those things in history, in our nation's history, that you know I felt was lost. We kind of forget about these little quote unquote little conflicts, not little locals, but
Nope.
but in actually this one with the Soviet Union and Cuba involved, it was a global conflict reduced down to a very small area. And I think unless we remember one what we do in those types of circumstances and those conflicts, and honor the men and women that served our nation so in such a dedicated way, regardless of any thought of a medal or a bonus. None of that was even part of it. You're just doing your job and doing it gracefully, under fire, under pressure. And so I'm glad we had the opportunity today to have you describe not only what you did down there, but also the country team, the important players, and hopefully those men and women will get more recognition as our country goes forward. Write the history, remember our history, and so that when we do, find ourselves in the same situation, we do things better and we don't make the same mistakes twice. Right?
One last interesting caveat
Sure.
to talk about with regard to the relationship of the State Department, uh, the Defense Department, the administration, and so on. As we all know, the United States ambassador to pick a country is the president's senior advisor in that country. The only one who can change anything going on in that country, other than the ambassador, is the president,
Right.
by presidential directive. Okay, so Ambassador Pickering meeting with the Secretary of State, the President, Secretary of Defense on a regular basis. Ambassador Pickering was tuned in to what was going on and what the administration wanted to have. The military folks throughout South and Central America received their support, transit to and from Salvador, Guatemala, Costa Rica, pick your country, uh, through Southern Command. We we went and ironed out costs of this mobile training team, that mobile training team, with staff members of U.S. Southern Command. On occasion, the commanding general of U.S. Southern Command had some thoughts that he felt that he might want to share with Colonel Stringham. Uh, on one occasion, at least one occasion, he neglected to have any conversations with the embassy staff about coming into El Salvador, and it wasn't the commanding general. It might have been his chief of staff, an Army 2-star. And I'm not using names on purpose. And I got a call from the ambassador's office that said General so and so is landing out at Ilopango airport. I would like you to go out to Ilopango and tell him that Colonel Stringham is not available, and that we appreciated his interest and support of what was going on in El Salvador, and he can continue on down to Panama. This
Thanks.
Yeah, yes, sir. I'll be happy to do that.
I'm sure you took it very nicely.
So Mrs. Richards, little boy Tommy, plane commander, goes out to tell this 2-star that nobody is here to talk to him, and that this was the State Department. I'll say, reminding the Defense Department who was in charge here, and it was Ambassador Pickering's agenda and Sec State's agenda, and that's how it was going to stay. And to the general's credit, I come walking up the stairs to the jet, and I start to tell him, and he says, "I understand, Commander. I appreciate the position you've been put in," and that was just a class thing for that guy to do. So they button up the airplane and they go away. But that was another incredible lesson about some of the tug of war that goes on at the highest levels within our military and State Department. One last thing, you said just a moment ago about we weren't in it for the awards, and we're not. I clearly, you've been able to see the level of job satisfaction that I had. So I knew that Colonel Stringham was getting ready to be reassigned, and Colonel Steele was going to be coming in. So without being asked, I just wrote up an award. And for those who are not aware, you've got the several parts of the award, and one is the justification. Another is the actual award that would be read at a ceremony that doesn't contain the 2 or 3 pages of justification of the award. So I wrote up the award justification. I wrote up the statement of the award, and because that had to be submitted through military channels, I wrote up the letter for Ambassador Pickering to send to the 4-star commander of U.S. Southern Command, respectfully requesting the general's support and the recognition for Colonel Stringham, who, as I said just a moment ago, found himself between the State Department and the Defense Department in that squeeze of pressure and priorities, and who's on first. So I put together this whole thing knowing that there had been that friction between the State Department and DOD, but more so understanding that Colonel Stringham was, if you will, he was the pivot man on that seesaw, and he was stuck, and I was a little bit concerned that perhaps Southern Command might be pissed at the general or the colonel rather, Stringham, for his support of the ambassador, etc. So I put this letter together for Ambassador Pickering to send down to the commander of U.S. Southern Command, and it basically said, I want to express my my highest regards, and I would greatly appreciate your support, and so I put that together, and before anybody asked for it, they asked for it from upstairs, and I gave them the whole package, and the ambassador secretary went, "How did you know?" Well, I just figured this should be done. If you didn't ask for it, I was going to bring it up here anyway.
Right.
So he got the highest award that you can get in peacetime, the Defense Distinguished Service Award.
Yeah.
So and so I'm still down there, and they must have processed that pretty quick because I was still in Salvador, and I get this phone call from Stringham, and he says, "What did you do?" and he wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
He was just doing his job.
Right.
And as I said, he was one of the hardest working individuals that I have ever worked for or with. And I'll say with because I worked with Colonel Stringham.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great time.
Awesome. You
Yeah.
know what? Thanks for coming, Tom. It's been great talking to you again, as always. For the audience out there, thanks for sharing it today with us. You all have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Scar Tissue. All right, Tom.
Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you, Wes.
Yep.